standard operating procedure when you bring a speaker for a group such as this would be to ask one of our supporters to read an introduction to Dr. Green. But I felt very strongly that we should depart from conventional procedure, because I felt that if someone were just to take a paper and read his bio, he would be doing a disservice to 25 years of a very special friendship between Velvel, Dr. Green, and Lubavitch in general, Lubavitch in Michigan particularly, and some of us individually here, myself and Shem Tov. Of course, he knows Emma from way, way back. And more than knowing what he has accomplished or what he is, I think it'd be more important for me to just tell you in a 30-second short why we decided to bring Dr. Green to speak to you. Dr. Green was born in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canadian by birth, and later on went on to become a professor of public health and microbiology in the University of Minnesota, where he served for 27 years. Tens of thousands of students that were graduated through under his tough auspices, believe me, I know. And universities and public health administrators around the country knew that they got one of Dr. Green's pupils. He was solid and tested. Of course, a very prolific writer. He wrote many papers and a world expert in those fields of epidemic control and hospital procedures and things of that nature. He was also involved in the NASA program, the space program, and a part of it which very few of you know about, called the Exobiology Project, which was basically, in layman's knowledge, from what I can understand, to prevent us from bringing back strange and exotic bugs from space that we might not have any resistance to. So we could leave the dessert till later, I think. We can, till 11, all right? About 6 years ago, after a very distinguished career in Minnesota, Dr. Green and his wife, Gail, decided to make Aliyah to Israel. And there he went into a very quiet, relaxed, and retirement. He teaches at the University of the Ben Gurion University of the Negev, in the medical school there. And over there, he just holds 2 jobs. So he now has double the responsibilities that he ever had before. And I won't ask what fraction of the wages, because I know the Israeli scene. It's pretty bad. He's a professor of public health, Carlin Professor of Public Health. He's also founded an Institute of Medical Ethics, which again has become a standard setter. It's the only institute of its kind, and has attracted world figures to it. It's a Lord Jakobowitz Center for Medical Ethics. Dr. Green is the head of it. So here we have this erudite person. Why did we ask him to speak to you? I'll tell you why. Because you and I, we all together have been going on a journey. Some of us for 20 years, we've known each other, 25, 40, whatever. Some of us maybe only the last few years, particularly with regard to this campus. We're walking along a playing field or a valley, if you will, and we're walking together, we're trying to reach a certain goal. But it's hard for us, in our little perspective, to see how far we've come and how far there is to go. You want to turn to someone on a mountainside, someone who's not walking along that field, but has a perspective from on high, who can look down and say, look, I've been around. I can tell you, Dr. Green is a world traveler. He's been traveling the world for as long as I remember. And he's a surveyor and historian of the Jewish scene. And we wanted him to give all of us, ourselves included, a sort of feel of where Judaism has been in the last 30, 40 years, where it's going to, and how do we fit in? But what Lubavitch has had to do with that? And how does the campus fit into that whole picture? So I turn to the man on the mountain, Dr. Green.
Thank you. Actually, coming to Detroit is like coming back to Mishpacha. I've known Emma Lazarov-Shaver since I was a little boy. I was not much more than 5 or 6 years old, and she came and she was a guest in our home. And she sang at a Pioneer Women's Luncheon at our home, and I remember it because my parents prepared me that this is one of the great women of our age. And so help me, when I've come to Lubavitch in Detroit over the years and have spoken at her home here in Detroit, it was my privilege, my honor, And I'll be very honest with it. I feel it's my honor. I'm not the man on the mountain. Everyone here knows what's going on because we all watch the same radio programs and we see the same TV. I'm not bringing you news from Israel, that just had a meeting with the Prime Minister yesterday. I'm going to tell you what he's going to say to Mr. Baker. I don't know these things. I have some qualifications. In my professional field, I become a bit of a historian in medicine. And the last book was very well acclaimed on what was called the health revolution. Certain things that happen in history, and when they happen, are very often overlooked. And only retrospectively, 20 years, 30 years, maybe 100 years later, do we see that was the key event, or those were the key actors, or these were the things that really made it go. So I have a bit of that in my background. At least I like to think I do. I won't be around when my predictions come true. Some of the younger ones will be. So if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But, you paid my fare to bring me from Israel. I gave up that. I'm an eyewitness. As Rabbi Kagan said, I do travel a great deal. I probably have been in more Lubavitch centers, more association with more Lubavitch activity around the world than any other single person. At least I'm proud of the fact that the Rebbe sometimes asks me to report to him on what's going on. He always says that he can get an objective opinion. But more than anything else, I'm a product of Lubavitch. I mean, this beard, the kippah, the fact that I davened this morning, the fact I knew when to stand up without having a rabbi tell me that this is a time to stand up. I knew what page they were on, that type of stuff. And that came from Lubavitch. I was a professor, I was a liberal, I was one of the guys who marched with Martin Luther King. I went to Louisiana in the 1950s, not the 60s, the 1950s. And didn't know much about Judaism. I was even for a little while a Reform rabbi. I was telling Rabbi Kagan, it wasn't a very great challenge. I was the only one in town who could read Hebrew, and they needed someone to run the services in the Reform temple. They gave me a robe. They gave me a salary. They called me rabbi, so I'm a rabbi. But something about 27, 28 years ago, something happened. It deals with this generation bridge talking about. My wife and I were in Poland. And Gail is even farther away than I was. Gail comes from a very, very assimilated background, from a little town in Southern California, where the only thing Jewish that she ever did was to marry a Jew. And that was practically my mistake. I don't know, she should be here to tell the story, not me. But when she was walking through the ghetto, or where the ghetto was, back in the very late 1950s, with only Mila 18 in front of her as a guidebook, and walking through the rubble, she came back to the hotel, and she started to cry. And she said, "It's all over. There's nothing here." And she looked me in the eye like only my Gail can look me in the eye. And she said, "Velva, when we get back home," she says, "I'm going to make my kitchen kosher." Really crazy. What do you know about making a kitchen kosher? I don't know anything about making kitchen kosher. I'm going to go ahead and speak to Rabbi Feller, who was the newly arrived Lubavitcher in our town. And so I'm going to ask him to make the kitchen kosher. And that's when it started. That's really when it started. Wandering through the desert of Warsaw. And coming home and asking, well, the story about how we changed the kitchen. When Rabbi Feller opened our refrigerator, he thought things that he'd never seen before in his life. Rabbi Feller making a kitchen kosher meant, going from this kosher butcher to another kosher butcher with a better hesher. But he thought things had crawled, you know what I mean? As Herman Wouk calls in his book, abominations. Sorry. Why am I here to tell you about this? Look, I'll tell you. I'll give you a Zionist analogy. When Dr. Herzl first wrote the book Alt Neuland, he gave it he gave it to a copy or a manuscript to Professor Nordau, who was a disciple of Freud, and he read it. Nordau did, and 2 days later, Herzl came back to him and said, "Max, what did you think?" And he says, "You are absolutely, certifiably crazy. You're insane. And what is worse, you've infected me with your insanity." As an epidemiologist, I react to that. If insanity now becomes an infectious disease, we all have a problem, and I'm warning you, I'll put a warning on the labels. You are all about to be infected. because Lubavitch changed my life. They're absolutely crazy, certifiably, doing the impossible, repealing all the laws of thermodynamics, and they've convinced me that they're right. There, I've said it. Not only me. This is why a guy at my age goes to Eretz Yisrael in the first place. It was Ben Gurion who said that in Israel, if you don't believe in miracles, you're not a realist. You know that? He's right. Lubavitch doesn't believe in miracles. They make the miracle. What can you do about these guys? The most frustrating people in the world. All the best advice I give them not to do something, and they do it, and it works. I tell them it won't work, it does work. Right now I have a problem with it. This is the year that God will show us miracles. What they say, Tashna. This will be the year of showing miracles. Hey, you know what? This is 1991. We're running down on the 20th century. The 20th century was, wow. When you start to think what the 20th century saw, to start with the advances in my field, in medicine, in science and technology, just alone. You're going to see your doctor this afternoon. The probability is that he will not only treat you and cure you with a drug, but a drug that was not available to him even 10 years ago. 60% of the surgical procedures that we do today were not on the books when I was going to school. We weren't around. 80% of the medicines we use today weren't available. I mean, and they're going to show us miracles. This is going to be the year to show. That's got to be a real class act to start showing us miracles in this 1991. Not only that, this was a year, or this was a century of a Bolshevism, its rise and fall. One of the greater events in history, economically, politically. This is the century of the Holocaust, the century of the State of Israel, the century of the blossoming and the growing and the growth of the Jewish community in America, one of the richest, most powerful, most stable in the history of mankind. This has already happened. And they're going to show us miracles. Don't forget, the year of showing miracles is going to be in the future. I don't know. Except in retrospect. Because I always have a gnawing feeling that when Lubavitch tells me something, I better listen carefully. And listen again. And think about it 3 times. Because they're not often wrong. So I thought about these great events. And I thought about these advances in science and technology and medicine. And I thought to myself, talk it true. We know how to do things today that we never could do before. But we don't know when to do them, or whether to do them, or if to do them, or to whom to do them. That's why I got into this field of medical ethics after spending a whole career at the University of Minnesota teaching medicine and public health, and sterilization, and sanitation. Now we're in the we don't know what to do. We got doctors who have the world in their hand and don't know what to do. Don't know whether to help a patient live, or to withdraw the plug, to help. Don't know what to do. We're like children in medicine, don't know what to do. And the Holocaust, the event of the century, it's being rewritten. It's revised. The non-Jews don't believe it. They were going to build a supermarket over there near Dachau. At least a convent. If it hasn't become forgotten, it's become trivialized. It's become universalized. You speak to any black man in this country, and there's a Holocaust in America too, after all. The Holocaust of America. And every Indian knows there's a Holocaust in America. It's been trivialized, been universalized. Nuns pray for the souls of the Polish martyrs. Polish martyrs. On Baba Yar. This happened 50 years ago at Baba Yar near Kyiv. There still isn't a sign there at all that these were Jews. This is what the fascists did to the Russians. Now we're negotiating with the Ukrainians who participated in it. Negotiating with them and bribing them to put the word Jew. There were some Jews who died in Baba Yar. This is a miracle. Israel, what should I say? I don't speak bad things about Israel. But it hurts. A country with some fantastic potential. But a government that's a political system. People. I don't want to speak about it. It's not nice. If it wasn't for the Russian immigration this year, there would be more Yordim, more people leaving Israel than coming to Israel. It's a beautiful dream, and I'm still imbued with it, and I'm... You know what, I was telling Itchimir that the slang in Israel right now, the word for empty, bragging, or false phrases, you know what the Hebrew word for it is? Zionism, Zionism. If a student says to me, don't talk Zionism, it means cool it. Cool it with the glorious phrases. They don't believe it. The word Zionism in Israel right now is a sort of a come down. It's not a compliment. Socialism, Bolshevism, who knows? The American Jewish community bothers me. I read Newsweek just like everyone else. I read what is happening in the American Jewish community. I read that not only has it become flat, but it's become small. The evidence of how many Jews left in America. How many Jews will there be in another generation? It's you know, it's the greatest, it's the strongest, it's the most powerful Jewish community, but it's the least effective. I mean, the American Jewish community with its potential, what it's produced has been used. Lox and bagel breakfast and Fiddler on the Roof. The great cultural achievement of the 20th century has been Fiddler on the Roof. If you don't believe me, it's the most familiar cultural representation in the Jewish world and the non-Jewish world. You know, when I come in, I used to lecture in Erie, Pennsylvania, and they had a party at night, and different people who came, and they played a theme song for them, you know. And a guy like me comes in, I wear a beard, and I come into this place, and they play for me from Fiddler on the Roof, you know, sunrise, velvet green, the sunrise and the sunset. What do I got to do? Okay. But there have been, in retrospect, two real miracles. I want to say this. I mean, I know I'm rhetorical, but I want to tell you honestly, this is the way I feel. I fly an awful lot in airplanes, and I do an awful lot of thinking. And when you fly as much as I do, you don't lie to yourself. One of the first things, you know, you try and get closer to the truth. One of the things that has happened has been the gathering of the exiles. Historically speaking, the 20th century will go down as the century in world history. It's never happened before. Never before in world history have so many Jews come from so many different places to one place. And they're doing it now. It so happens I know about this because I wrote a monograph not too long ago, and I'm going to be lecturing on this at an international congress next week on the history of Aliyah in Israel. I was doing it from a public health point of view. I was trying to trace what happens when you take a community of people who come from an environment like the Ethiopians and bring them into Israel. What is the danger of the diseases spreading? And you should know, incidentally, that we have a problem because they have a tuberculosis rate that is 300 times higher than anything that the United Nations has ever, that the World Health Organization has ever reported. It's a real interesting problem about what we do, and now we just discovered that some of our drugs aren't as effective as we thought. But anyway, I was studying this. So I went into the library and I started studying the Aliyot and the state of Israel. And the reason I don't say anything bad about it is because no matter what they do, and no matter how corrupt, what they've done is save the lives of Jews from everywhere. From Yemen, and from Bulgaria, and from Iraq. And I'm not talking about a few Jews like they come from America. Whole communities, the Bulgarian community, and the Iranian community, and the Yemenite community, and the island of Jibra off Libya, the whole community. They were happy to come. They were all Kohanim. Isn't that interesting? They didn't have a lot Eliyot. When they went to shul, they didn't know who to go first because they were all Kohanim, the whole community. And they came to be a doctor in Israel today. We have to teach our students this. You might have to speak still 7 or 8 different languages just to meet your patients, just to ask vutudve. And that's a pretty good word you use, vututve, it comes across. You have to say this. I had to learn when I was helping in the delivery room how to say push again in 13 different languages. Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. To see the Jews from all over the world. And they wouldn't be there. They wouldn't be alive if Israel hadn't brought them in, brought them the physical saving. I was telling Itzmeir a story that I must share with you. You would love this video. When we first came to Israel 6 years ago, we lived in a community in the center where the Merkaz Klita of the Ethiopians, where all the Ethiopians, that was the Operation Moses, the previous one. Mm-hmm. And there were hundreds and hundreds of Ethiopians living and shopping in the same places we shop. And every morning when I'd come home from shul, I would go to the little market and buy some croissants and some cheese and some fruit and take it upstairs, and my wife and I would have coffee, and I was always surrounded by these black Ethiopians wearing their note of casa. I couldn't speak the language. They spoke Amharic. And I was walking out one day with just in Israel for 5 days, and a little black boy, about 4 or 5 years old, cute as a bug, curly hair, big black eyes, looked up at me and he said in very newly learned Hebrew, he said, "Sir, where are you from?" I don't make ayin at that. So I said in my Hebrew, I was also learning Hebrew. Okay, saying that. So the conversation took a long time because of his Hebrew and my Hebrew. "I am from America." And he looked at me, and if anything, his eyes grew bigger. He says, "America? Are you Olim from America?" And I said, "Nachon, Olim Ma'atzot Habrit." He said, "Olim? Olim Chadashim? New immigrants?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Adon, Hakim, Baruch Haba. Welcome to Israel." The little 4-year-old black little baby boy who learned already in school that when a new immigrant comes to Israel, the first thing you do to him is to say Baruch Haba. And I start to cry. An old Zionist waited 50 years to come to Israel to be greeted by a little black boy saying Baruch Haba. But there's a problem, because we've saved the bodies, and we're having difficulty. We're having difficulty with saving the Jews. So this is the second miracle of the 20th century. And this is where Chabad comes in. Because in addition to the Aliyah in Israel, in addition to the emotion that you see at the Kotel of people coming and crying, in addition to people living in Yerushalayim, the recognition that there are hundreds and thousands and millions of Jews who are not in Israel and who have not yet come to Israel and don't know about Israel. And they live all over the world, and they live in Australia and in Africa, and they live in Grand Rapids, and they live in Detroit, they live in Minneapolis and in Rochester, and they live in South America, and they live in Zaire, and they live in Zimbabwe. And they don't have a kotel. And they don't have anyone to say Baruch Haba. And they're in the same position as we are because things are fading. And they're forgetting. And they're losing. And they're being diluted to extinction. And what has happened is the phenomenon of our age. The Rebbe is sending his messengers, his emissaries, to every last corner of the world. And to say to every Jew, wherever you are, you're a Jew, you're my brother, Baruch Haba, you're mine. We are together. You know, the idea we are one is not just a slogan for raising money. In Chabad, it's a soul question. We are one, we share a soul. You and me. Chabad is the one organization in the world that does not look to see who you are. Reform, a conservative, did go to shul, not go to shul, a Yiddish neshama, born to a Jewish mother? Or did you accept the yoke of the Torah on yourself voluntarily, and you became a ger tzedek? You are one with me, everywhere. And this is what I bear living witness to, because I've seen it everywhere. I've seen it in your state, and I've seen it in places where there are no Jews. until after Lubavitch came. And they remembered. And they remembered. Because they see a guy like this walking down the street, or like this walking down the street, and says, there's something in my memory. There's something in the memory. And Lubavitch takes them to their heart and gives them what they need. They need a book. We got a book. Supper, supper. Shabbos, Shabbos. Kiddush, Kiddush. Kaddish, Kaddish. You see this in Israel, in the army bases. Out there, you know, it's tough to be a soldier in Israel. It's tough to be a soldier right now because it's not a popular operation, Intifada. When you're out there somewhere in one of the camps, in a prison camp, as a guard, they're throwing rocks, little kids throwing rocks at you. You can't shoot. You're a Jewish boy, you don't shoot little kids. And you're lonely and you're confused. And a jeep pulls up with a couple of Chabadnik. And it's Purim. And they dance, they sing, and they drink vodka. Drink vodka. And the Jew knows. You know, the loneliest place in the world is Kfar Chabad on Purim. I went there once to celebrate Purim with my... There was nobody there. A couple of older ladies, a few people who were in the hospital, in the infirmary, where they were giving Purim to the world, to the Chabad. They made sure that every widow of every war was visited that day on Purim with shalach manas, special shalach manas, bottle of wine, a cake, and grab the children and let them know, Chabad, we are one. The rejuvenation to see this, you know, the greatest thrill I had, because I sort of ran a little Chabad house in Minneapolis too. It was a little boy from South America, never forget. Used to come, I didn't think he spoke English. He was from Ecuador. I thought he spoke Spanish only. He used to sit at the table week after Shabbos. And then he turned to me once and he said, you know, Professor Green, he says, you're the first person in the world I've met who enjoys being a Jew. I says, don't you? He says, I'm beginning to. I'm beginning to. He ultimately ended up in Morristown. Went to Morristown. Interesting thing. But before he went to Morristown, we circumcised him. He grew up in Ecuador, and because they were afraid, they were circumcised him. And where did I find him? In the Concordia Theological Seminary, learning to be a Lutheran minister. You see? But Yom Kippur, he stumbled into a Chabad shul, the only place that you can go without a ticket. It's a balagan, it's a hefker. You know, maybe we should have tickets, but I know that we wouldn't have found Pedro. My wife tells in Moshe what you would enjoy. My wife is a musician. She's a singer, not quite like you. She tries hard. And once I asked her a real serious question. I said, you know, I love the opera you're doing. They were doing La Bohème. I love that opera. I could listen to La Bohème at least once a month, maybe once a week. But you go to rehearsal after rehearsal, and you put on the darn thing, and you put on a matinee on Wednesday, and you never seem to get tired of it. Don't you ever get bored with La Bohème? She says, well, don't you know the difference between a spectator and a participant? And I just got it. That's what Chabad does, is taking people like me and turning them from spectators, from sitting in the audience and saying, okay, Rabbi, turn me on, you know, Rabbi, inspire me, Rabbi, send me that, to become a participant. Here you put on film. Taste and see, the Torah says. Taste and see that God is good. And the only way you're going to know He's good is to taste Him. And how do you taste Him? Come to my house for Shabbat. Kanas from Malabamak. Let's have a bite. You want to learn what the Torah says? Learn. Here it is. Let's sit down and learn. Let's sit down and learn. You have a problem? I have a problem. We have a school in Minneapolis, for girls who graduated from college. Hundreds, thousands have come to this school to learn how to enjoy being Jewish. after being told by the Jewish leadership in the world that Judaism is an intellectual, ethical monotheism. It's good, of course it's ethical monotheism. What else is it? But it's also taste and see. It's also being part of a camp. Look at the pictures on the wall. I should come to Detroit to tell you what's going on. Look at those hundreds of kids enjoying being Jewish, being positive Jews, enjoying each other. It so happens that everyone tries to imitate, and some of them are successful, but the only ones who go out everywhere in the world, everywhere, who have never, as far as I know, turned down a Jew or a challenge because of the Rebbe, does the same thing. Oklahoma. And this last tour, I was at Raleigh, North Carolina, and Wilmington, Delaware, and Dover, Delaware, and little places that you never heard of, from Oxford University to Grand Rapids, Michigan. Is there a Jew in the world who hasn't been touched? No. No. Ever. And this last visit, I went with my son to prisons. There's a prison in Rochester. And unfortunately, there's a minyan. And as a minyan, you have to have someone to read the Torah. So David, who is the shliach in Rochester, goes to the prison. He took me with. They were so happy, because unfortunately there's 3 Israelis there. And I could tell them what's going on in Israel, because they don't get the news from Israel. And so they're prisoners, but they're Jews. You know what? You ever have that feeling? What are you doing here, you idiot? What did you do this for? But nonetheless, you're from Israel. I'll tell you what's going on. Because they didn't want to hear what they got in the papers. They wanted to hear, you know, how the highway is being fixed, and this is a problem, and who's running this politics, and you know, that kind of, look, we are one with the prisoners and with the sick. And long, long before it became popular to go to Russia, we went to Russia. In fact, it's this week, I'll never forget, that I took my first clandestine trip to Russia, ostensibly to attend a meeting. Tell you a story. On the way to Russia, I was stopped in London by the Lubavitcher who was organizing it. And he came up to our room and he unpacked all our stuff. You know, Gil wasn't very happy. He says, all you need is one dress. One dress is enough, right? He's going to tell her what styles are like. Okay, one dress. And, oh, well, you don't even need that. Okay, clothes on your back are good enough. What for? I got to pack stuff in your suitcase. And he packed the stuff that was meat and milk and swarm, a whole dictionary, a Jastrow dictionary of the Talmud, and somebody, tapes. We bound the suitcase with the leather straps that you use for film. That's what we bound. Tens of meters, about 30 feet of binding, the best bound suitcase in the world. That's one of the ways to get to it. But then he came to me and he said, Velma, we have to send in some talus cotton. And you know, Lubavitch talus cotton is no small thing. They're not made of cotton like normal civilized people wear. It was wool, and this was in August, and it's hot. And he says, we need to get 4 pair in there. And I said, you're absolutely crazy. You know what to say that you're crazy? Yeah. He says, yeah, but you'll wear them. So I said, Shmuel, listen, you know, I'm going to go, I'm kind of substantial myself, with 4 tallis, you know, they're going to look at me at the border. They'll take my shirt off. And they'll see 4 of them. Won't they think it's kind of queer? He says, and one looks normal. We are one. They're crazy. Because that's it. Is this normal, what we're doing here? To sit in 1991 in Detroit and plan for a campus, for a continuity, for a future, when it should have been all written off. I can show you books that prove that Lubavitch was no longer in existence after 1906. They proved it in Yiddish. A historical book. And here I am sitting in Detroit, having flown over from Eretz Yisrael yesterday to return tomorrow, because I'm busy, to tell you that you're crazy, and I'm crazy, and they're crazy, And it's the only thing that can be counted as a miracle in 1991, and in 1990, and in the future. And there's a new thing. It's not only for Jews. The Rebbe started very seriously on the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach, the universal laws. Because when I was teaching at the university, I got a lot of correspondence with him. He says, you have an influence on thousands and thousands of non-Jews. Be sure to teach them what God and the Torah demands of them. But don't tell them that it's in the Torah, because they'll reject it. Teach them by example. Teach them by instruction. Teach them by analogy. Teach them by logic. It's the same thing, my wife again, with the story of participants and spectators. She tells a beautiful example. She tells a story about an orchestra where all of a sudden the 2 horns wanted to become violins because there were so many violins, and the violins make such beautiful sounds, and the horns are only called upon every so often, and they sound brassy. So the horns wanted to become violins. So the horns tried very, very hard, and ultimately they called themselves violins. So there were 2 things wrong. Number 1, when they needed a horn, it wasn't there. Number 2, when they needed a violin, it wasn't there. Because when God created the world, when he wrote this symphony of life, he said, there will be horns, and there will be violins, and there will be drums, and there will be oboes, and everyone has to play his particular score as it was written for him. And then Gil said to me, and the best conductor is the one who knows what the composer was hearing when he wrote it. And that's what Lubavitch is about. We have a conductor who knows what the composer wanted. And he's directing this world for us. Honestly. That you will do this and I will do this. I'll fly from Eretz Yisrael. You come here. You do what you have to do, and you do what you have to do. Because that's the way we make miracles. Let me just tell a little story and I'll finish. I'm sorry I took too long, but I used to go around the world telling stories about my NASA days when I worked for the National Aeronautics and Space People. And I used to tell stories about the analogies between Torah and the space program. But one story I must tell, a very, very simple one. It's a story of what happens when we launch the satellite. Excuse me, we launch this rocket that has to go to the nearest star, which is something like 4 light years away. It'll take 800 years to get there, and 800 years to get back. And there's no way that anyone is going to make it, so we have to launch a couple of people, men and women, so they will have children, so they'll have children, so they'll have children, so there'll somebody be there. And we have a real problem with this, in addition to all sorts of navigation problems and feeding problems. One of the major problems is that when we launch this rocket, everyone on the rocket knows what gravity was. Because we remembered it. Here we are sitting in this room, we're sitting on a chair, you stand up, you wait, But you know that about 25 minutes after this rocket is launched, it goes into orbit. And then it's going to go into a voyage for 800 years, and it's going to be gravity-free, weightless. And you're going to have something like 24 generations of children who are going to be born into a world that has no gravity, has no weight. And so the children will be born, and they'll think that this is the real world. But you have to know what the real world is, because when you get to the end of that voyage, and you start getting into the influence of the gravity of that next star or the next planet, you have to buckle up. If you don't buckle up, you'll smash into the atmosphere and be blown up, and it's not kedai altogether. So someone has to know what gravity is. And what is worse, someone has to transmit the information to the next generation. So I just imagine that story myself. I have wonderful grandchildren. Baruch Hashem, I have 11 grandchildren. And 9 of them live in Eretz Yisrael. And I take the older ones and put them in my lap. And I tell them stories about the old country. And they were all living in Beersheba, okay? And I tell them stories about grass and trees and flowers. I tell them about ice and snow. I tell them that near our house there was a lake And on our way to shul, we used to walk over the lake. Avarnu al Agam. And right beside us there were people who stand and drilled holes in the ice, and they were fishing while we were walking to shul. So the little kids laugh. They think it's a cute story. They don't believe a word. They don't believe a word. I said, no, be'emet, that was the real world. What we're in right now, this is just Eretz Yisrael. The desert is not normal. Can't stop. Great. We go back there. The old man is off on another bit. Well, their children will be told the same stories, but I won't be around. So the stories will lose something in my credibility. And their grandchildren will hear it from their children. Can you imagine the difficulty it is to transmit it from one generation to another, where you came from and where you're going, what the real world is? So it was necessary at the beginning of this mission to ensure the fact that somebody on the ship at all times knew which way was up and which way was down, what was real and what was an illusion, what was permanent and what was temporary. And he couldn't make a mass movement on it because they just believe it. People, people are interested now in TV, they're interested in football games, whatever. I don't knock it, I like football too. He took one guy, fella, Abe. He said, Abe, listen, in addition to all of the other problems you have on the spaceship, how to get there and get back, I want you to have one. You teach your kids the following, which is up and which is down. Okay? Teach them which is right and which is wrong. Teach them which is permanent, which is temporary, and have them teach it to their children. And that's what you have to do. And listen carefully, because if one generation misses the message, then the whole thing fails. Because we're going to get into the atmosphere of that other planet, and there won't be anyone there to say that the trip is coming to an end. And you've got to be ready for it, because you got to buckle up and you got to fire the retro rockets. You got a whole bunch of things. You got to anticipate the end when it gets in close. And if you don't do it, that's all you have to do. It sounds weird. Teach it diligently to their children at all the time. Just the following words. This is up and this is down. This is right and this is wrong. I don't care what the rest of the world says. I don't care what the rest of the world says. Everyone has their job in this world. He has to pilot this, and he has to provide the food, and he has to provide the recreation, and he's got to be... And I have to know which way is up and which way is down. The world, not only me, not only my family, the whole world depends on me getting that message across to my children and them to their children. And this is what Lubavitch is doing. And this is what Lubavitch is doing in Detroit. And I want to congratulate you for that. It's a tremendous idea. I told my wife when I read the faxes that Rabbi Kagan sent me about this project, I said, I'm reaching the end of my career. And I'm a pretty happy man. I've had a success in life. I had a success in my profession. I've published hundreds of papers. I've had thousands of students. I have a nice family. I have a nice home. I've never really regretted not going into the business world. I've never really regretted not being rich. I do now. I really do. I wish I was wealthy, because I would like to participate in this project. I don't think there'd be anything nicer than to have a corner of this project that described to my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, the Green family. And you put a picture up there of a lake, and put a picture up of a tree, so the children would know where we came from and where we're going. Thanks for inviting. Can I take this off?
Sure. Sure. That has an extension that goes all the way to Beersheba.
Rabbi, was that video
I can listen to more.
Is that where we take, so where we could, whatever we take, I
I had that. I wanted to. I don't know, he has the edits, I think, I don't know, this is all together in one big tape, so I don't know how quick they can be, but
Super
Said
marvelous.
that should be.
No,
You mean the whole thing, I understand. You're right. That would be wonderful.
You can't take so alive.
Because we have it this year.
Oh, yeah, that's the intention.
Okay.
I participate in the Lubavitch Detroit and the heritage of the Jews, that's all, you know. But tzaddik I'm not, but I know that we have to be that.
You don't know who's the tzaddik.
Years ago, I
Okay.
Gotta keep trying, Harry.
Yeah.
I tried.
With you.
No.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I've never forgotten because it was beautifully written.
That was a funny story. That was even written up in Time magazine. You know? Yeah. That's. I've been coming into my room and suddenly putting on the garden.
That was so
Yeah. Sure.
Have a little more shop and very close. Next to Honolulu.
I will.
I don't know it.
I'm by Yichus Slonim.
Ah, okay.
And we spend time when we're there, we go very often.
Oh, I don't know Frank, I've never seen it.
It's relatively new.
While we're munching on dessert and winding things down, if anyone would like to have some questions for this superb speaker about a wonderful friend, please feel free. And, or if you have anything to add, any ideas how we can enhance our dinner, get more people for the project, make our minion.
Will he come back and be the speaker?
Oh, I was thinking the same thing.
That's what I said.
That's what I
You're
thought.
very kind, I'll tell you,
We have to try.
no, I debate.
Yeah.
It happened on medicine and ethics in Yerushalayim, and I'm the chairperson of that session. It's a Sunday night, and
Maybe next year.
next year I'll be happy to come. Really, I like Detroit. I like Detroit, and I like the way I'm treated here.
Oh, sorry.
And Minnesota beat Detroit last night on baseball.
Yeah, 6-3.
Yeah.
And so forth, a good group, but not, they won't be highlighted as everybody shot still, and now here comes the main event of the evening, not that kind of thing.
Not the kind of people we've had, like Peggy Zuckerman.
No,
Okay.
no. Our committee has felt that,
Rabbi King had it.
Going to go get a fresh one, it's so bad at all.
No, it's a fresh one.
Right, I write. When in Detroit, the guy, he doesn't write me letters, and he found that I was here, he comes to the hotel, takes me to Home Beach. So, I'm just saying that Lubavitch, for a spiritual organization, spends an awful lot of effort seeing that people are fed, with food.
no, you haven't found out our secret yet, Robert. Listen, this is all calorie-free. It's spiritualized.
I can see, yeah.
Yeah.
It's really true.
There's still a large population of people from Ethiopia in Beersheba.
Yes.
Are they finding employment?
Yes, the Ethiopians are going all right. The old people not, but the younger ones. Only go to school and in the army, and they get employment. They're very good mechanics.
That's always neat.
Dr. Green, I think it was very interesting what you were telling me about the Ethiopian soldiers
Yes.
greeting the...
Oh, yes, this was, we were talking before, when we were looking at the display, that the Ethiopian immigration, this last Operation Solomon, was extremely well organized. It was just a model of efficiency, because once they knew that they were going to bring them out within a 24-hour period on the Shabbat, they went into the army and they took every Ethiopian boy and girl who was serving in the army and they moved them to Lud Airport and to the Diplomat Hotel in Yerushalayim. That's where the reception was, so that there were people who spoke the language and looked the same thing, and they were wearing Israeli uniforms. And their Israeli soldiers are pretty good. They're still pretty good. Very efficient. They moved them. They saw that families got together. They picked up the babies. They calmed them. It was just a very, very beautiful type of thing. I was very, very pleased. I saw this. I wasn't at the airport. I was at the Diplomat Hotel when they came in, and I saw these soldiers carrying trays of water, because these people have been on the plane for some of them for as long as 12, 16 hours. And so they bought bottles of water and told them it was okay to drink. That was the most important, The Ethiopians generally are very, very laid-back people, very, very quiet, passive is the word, yes, quiet, and they're not aggressive. They won't ask for a glass of water, you see. They won't ask. And they certainly don't know how to use a tap. And, it was very, very, it was a very effective operation. We all were very, very proud of it. I must tell you, we were very, very proud of it.
It was interesting that there was a high incidence of AIDS.
There is high AIDS in this new group, yes. And there's a high incidence of syphilis too. The incidence of AIDS is not that high, it's relatively speaking. There have been only 5 or 6 cases of AIDS. But don't forget, in Israel, since 1981, we've only had 135 cases of AIDS altogether. So 5 or 6 cases that appear in 1 week is a very, very high gap. No, TB is our real problem because the incidence is extremely high.
And you say the new drugs are not effective?
Well, we were just reading that the new drugs are not as effective as they should be in preventing transmission. What is more, this TB is a different TB. Something like 60% of the TB that we see is not pulmonary. It's not in the lungs. It's in the bone and in the kidneys. So we have to know this so we can alert the doctors. It's the most important thing. You see, if a doctor does not know how to look, he won't look for it. So right now in Israel, there's a big push for everyone to get TB tested again and to get X-rays. It's a real, especially the people who are in association with them. TB is not a joke.
Yeah. And apparently it's transmitted very easily.
Yeah, very easily transmitted, yeah. So we're waiting. We're keeping our fingers crossed, certainly, and we're watching it. I always worry about people in the hospital. There was just an outbreak in Texas just last year, which was a sad one. There was an ambulance with an alcoholic in it, yes, and he was passing the Parkland Hospital in Dallas, and he went into cardiac arrest. This is just in the United States. So they admitted him to emergency immediately. And before it was over, 27 people in Parkland Hospital got tuberculosis. Within the next year were infected with tuberculosis.
Where President Kennedy was doing
That's right, that's right. But it's just, the guy had a fulminating case of tuberculosis. And they didn't suspect it, and they didn't take the proper precautions. And so 27 people apparently got infected. 5 of them got sick. And it was a very, very bad act. So we have to alert our doctors. You know, family practice physician sits in the Mapiata clinic. Patient comes in, you check on the chin, how are you? Maybe you should find out what they got before you become a little too familiar.
So they're all going through a fairly strenuous physical.
Yeah, we're watching it.
Disagreeing.
Yeah. I still get arrested in Israel for crossing the street at the wrong place.
Not in
Beersheba.
Beersheba?
Beersheba, yeah. What are you going to do?
I was going to say in Tel Aviv.
No, Beersheba.
Beersheba.
Please sit in one place.
So it's so heavily populated already that...
And I was so proud I was an Israeli. I should have showed him. I said, I can't speak Hebrew. And I got an American passport, and they let me go. But, he asked me for my identification number, so I gave it to him. So that was, I had to pay. It cost me $18 for crossing the street.
Oh, my God.
Really?
I might have been the first and the last.
$18?
Yeah, so at that time, sure.
Right.
It was 36 shekels at that time.
Crossing the road. Gee,
Everything
If I
is
killed
inflated.
someone, it would be much less.
Everything's inflated now, including the fine.
Everything has a scale of that.
What about Yiddishkeit? With the Ethiopians, are they
They're wonderful people.
accepting the recommendation from...
Not only that, yes, they are. Let me tell you, my association of Ethiopians, it makes me feel good. We had a number of Ethiopian men davening in our shul. And last year for Rosh Hashanah, they decided that they wanted to have their own services. So they went to the Rabbanut, and the Rabbanut got them a place. I got them a Sefer Torah. And there were 3 or 4 boys from the Ethiopian community who are already going to yeshiva. One of them going to Lubavitch yeshiva. That's very nice. And so they could learn. They could do the Kriyat Torah, and they led the services by their own they're only just, they don't read. There's only 2 or 3 people in the community. Most of them are illiterate. But they didn't have anyone who could blow the shofar. They didn't have that. And so this, the rabbi who was organizing from the Rabbanut called to me. Why? Because Lubavitch is known as people who go out and blow the shofar. You know, I mean, the people go to the hospitals and they go to the prisons and the mental hospitals. They go everywhere. So he thought, look, Velva Green will do it. And I did. And when I came into the room, we were all sitting in my shofar, I was very, they stood up. And I wondered why. And one of the kids later explained to me in Hebrew, they'd seen me in the hospital in my white lab coat. You see, and they thought that I was coming as a doctor. And their custom is to stand up when a doctor comes in, or a professor or something like that. So they stood up. Well, then when I brought up the shofar, they all sat down again. And I blew the shofar. So I blew the shofar for the Ethiopian community in Beersheba. And next year, God willing, they won't need me. They'll have their own. They're okay. They're very, very okay, let me tell you. On the other hand, with the Russians, we have a real problem. I was just telling Rabbi Kagan an interesting story. They did a survey. 97% of the Russians on this last Tisha B'Av did not know what Tisha B'Av was about. What did the word mean? Now, they did not know because the word fast in Russian is not like what we call it. It is a word that the church, the Russian church, uses when the priest does not drink wine on a certain day. You see, it's really the word abstention. So they didn't know that there were such things in Jewish life as fast, except for Yom Kippur. And they didn't know what we were mourning. So when somebody said we're mourning for the destruction of the temple, then you had to explain to them that there was a temple. We're talking about, this is the thing. You know, we're talking about Jews who don't know anything. No, 90% or 88%, some number of them, had never seen the inside of a Bible in any language whatsoever. Didn't know. And we're trying very, very hard. Our problem is communication. We always have families over for Shabbat. We always, my shmuley goes down and drags people in for Shabbat. So they sit and they eat.
The missionaries shepherd?
Not a beer Shabbat, not beer
Just
Shabbat.
in
Just in the Shalai.
Yeah, Dr. Green, my mother is.
They must also, when you say
We're having a lot of trouble. We have a lot.
Ethiopians, you say are mechanical.
The Ethiopians will take him to small towns, or maybe he wasn't a great doctor, but he was a doctor, and ask him to be a parking lot attendant.
I am now.
It's past it.
So I said to this young.
So what are you going to do, fire a doctor to make room for a doctor?
But many of the Russian doctors are nevertheless doing some of those things.
Well, we're advising most of them if they can pass their license exam to go into private practice in the Russian community, because they can speak the language. But in order to pass the license examination, there's 3 handicaps. They have to be able to speak Hebrew, they have to be able to read English, and they have to know the Israeli pharmacopoeia. They have to know what drugs can be prescribed and what are not. And that requires a good 6 months to a year of study. And for the younger ones, that's fine, but the older ones, I have a friend, my basic problem is to keep him from becoming despondent and depressed. He's 62 years old, and he came over, and he's not going to find work. And we speak Yiddish to each other.
What kind of physician was he?
Well, he was a sanitarian physician, basically. He was a public health physician. We don't need them.
Well, within enclosure.
Well, we need them. We don't have the money for it. We needed them before, you know.
Still need them.
Yeah, but
I'd look into it.
how can he go and
Outdoor,
inspect
how you can, but indoor,
a food plant if he can't speak the language?
Well, that's what I mean. It's like-
Well, it seems to me that at 62, he certainly ought to be able to pick up,
Well,
learn a language.
I'm giving him a little bit of work in my office. He sits there and he does some tabulating for me, so at least he feels useful. But we both know it's a charade. I do research projects and get a lot of data, and I give him the data, and I have them tabulated, so he's helpful.
Well, apparently some of the Russians have been active in all.
Oh, it's terrible. It is terrible.
It's a handicap.
Give me credit for it, and I don't throw away. I keep
You remember, that was originally how we got into trouble with this building.
We know how to do things today that we never could do before. But we don't know when to do them, or whether to do them, or if to do them, or to whom to do them. That's why I got into this field of medical ethics after spending a whole career, University of Minnesota, teaching medicine and public health, sterilization, sanitation. Now we're in the we don't know what to do. We got doctors who have the world in their hand and don't know what to do. Don't know where to help the patient live. They've drawn the plug. They don't know what to do. We're like children in medicine, don't know what to do. And the Holocaust, the event of the century, it's being rewritten. It's revised. The non-Jews don't believe it. They were going to build a supermarket over there near Dachau. At least a convent. If it hasn't become forgotten, it's become trivialized, it's become universalized. You speak to any black man in this country, and there's a Holocaust in America too, after all. The Holocaust of America. And every Indian knows there's a Holocaust in America. Either they wouldn't be alive if Israel hadn't brought them in, brought the physical saving. I was telling Itzmair a story that I must share with you. You would love this. When we first came to Israel 6 years ago, we lived in a community in the center where the Merkaz Klita of the Ethiopians, where all the Ethiopians, that was the Operation Moses, the previous one. And there were hundreds and hundreds of Ethiopians living and shopping in the same places we shop. Every morning when I'd come home from shul, I would go to the little market and buy some croissants and some cheese and some fruit and take it upstairs. My wife and I would have coffee, and I was always surrounded by these black Ethiopians wearing their North Casa. They couldn't speak the language, they spoke Amharic. And I was walking out one day, just in Israel for 5 days, and a little black boy, about 4 or 5 years old, curly hair, big black eyes, looked up at me and he said in very newly learned Hebrew, he said, "Sir, where are you from?" I said in my Hebrew, I was also learning Hebrew, okay, I'll say that. The conversation took a long time because of his Hebrew and my Hebrew. "I am from America." And he looked at me, and if anything, his eyes grew bigger. He says, "America? Are you Olim from America?" And I said, "Nachon, Olim Arzut Habrit." He said, "Olim? Olim Chadashim? New immigrants?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Adon, Alkim, Baruch Haba, welcome to Israel." A little 4-year-old black little baby who learned already in school that when a new immigrant comes to Israel, the first thing you do to him is to say Baruch Haba, and I start to cry. An old Zionist waited 50 years to come to Israel to be greeted by a little black boy saying Baruch Haba. But there's a problem, because we've saved the bodies, and we're having difficulty. We're having difficulty with saving the Jews. So this is the second miracle of the 20th century. And this is where Chabad comes in. Because in addition to the Aliyah in Israel, in addition to the emotion that you see at the Kotel of people coming and crying, in addition to people living in Yerushalayim, the recognition that there are hundreds and thousands and millions of Jews who are not in Israel and who have not yet come to Israel and don't know about Israel. And they live all over the world, and they live in Australia and in Africa, and they live in Grand Rapids, and they live in Detroit, and they live in Minneapolis and in Rochester, and they live in South America, and they live in Zaire, and they live in Zimbabwe. And they don't have a kotel. and they don't have anyone to say Baruch haba. And they're in the same position as we are because things are fading, and they're forgetting, and they're losing, and they're being diluted to extinction. And what has happened is the phenomenon of our age. The Rebbe is sending his messengers, his emissaries, to every last corner of the world, and to say to every Jew, wherever you are, you're a Jew, you're my brother, Baruch haba, you're mine, we are together. You know, the idea we are one is not just a slogan for raising money. In Chabad, it's a soul question. We are one, we share a soul. You and me. Chabad is the one organization in the world that does not look to see who you are. Reform, a conservative, did go to shul, not go to shul, a Yiddish neshama, born to a Jewish mother. Or did you accept the yoke of the Torah on yourself voluntarily? You became a ger tzedek. You are one. Everywhere. And this is what I bear living witness to, because I've seen it everywhere. I've seen it in your state. And I've seen it in places where there are no Jews until after Lubavitch came. And they remember. And they remember. Because they see a guy like this walking down the street, or like this talking on the street, and says, there's something in my memory. There's something in the memory. And Lubavitch takes them to their heart and gives them what they need. They need a book. We got a book. Supper. Shabbos. Kiddush. Kaddish. You see this in Israel, in the army bases. Out there, you know, it's tough to be a soldier in Israel. It's tough to be a soldier right now because it's not a popular Operation Intifada. When you're out there somewhere in one of the camps, a prison camp, there's a guard, they're throwing rocks, little kids throwing rocks at you. You can't shoot a Jewish boy, you don't shoot little kids. And you're lonely and you're confused. And a jeep pulls up with a couple of Chabadnik. And it's Purim.